The elevator doors were closing when Bennett stumbled into the hotel corridor, barefoot, shaking, and crying so hard she could barely breathe. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Her white dress was torn at the hem, her hair was tangled across her face, and one thought kept pounding inside her mind. If he catches me, I'm finished. She had run from the man who once promised to love her forever. She had run from the man who knew every weakness she had, every place she could hide, every person she trusted. But Claire didn't know that the elevator she was desperately trying to reach already contained someone far more feared than the man chasing her. A man whose name made powerful people lower their voices. A man who had been called ruthless, merciless, and the most dangerous man in America. And tonight, he was about to become the only person standing between Claire and the nightmare she had been running from. If you believe that kindness can save a broken heart and that everyone deserves a second chance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because Claire's story is about to prove that sometimes the person who looks the most frightening can have the gentlest heart. Claire had once believed she had found her forever in Marcus Hale. They met 3 years earlier at a charity event in Chicago, Illinois, where Claire was working as an event coordinator. Marcus was charming, successful, and incredibly attentive. He remembered the little things she said. He brought coffee when she worked late. He told her she deserved the world. At first, he made her feel safe. But love can sometimes wear a beautiful mask. Slowly, Marcus began controlling everything. He questioned who Claire talked to. He checked her phone. He complained when she visited her mother. He became angry when she worked late with male colleagues. Then came the apologies, the flowers, the promises that he would change. Claire kept believing him because she remembered the man he had been in the beginning. The day she finally understood that love was not supposed to feel like fear, she packed one suitcase and left. She thought leaving would be the hardest part. She was wrong. Marcus refused to accept that she was gone. He called from different numbers. He waited outside her apartment. He sent messages saying he knew where she was. Claire changed apartments, changed jobs, and even stayed with her older sister Grace for several weeks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But every time she began to feel safe, another message appeared. Then, one rainy evening, Claire received a photograph. It showed her standing outside the grocery store. The picture had been taken only minutes earlier. Beneath it were 5 words, "You can't hide from me." Claire knew she needed help, but fear had convinced her that no one could protect her. That night, she drove for hours without knowing where she was going. She eventually reached New York City, hoping the size of the city would swallow her completely. She checked into an expensive hotel using the last of her savings, planning to stay only 2 nights before figuring out what came next. She didn't know Marcus had already found her. The hotel corridor suddenly exploded with footsteps. Claire turned and saw him at the far end. Marcus. His face was twisted with anger, his expensive suit soaked from the rain. He wasn't shouting yet. Somehow, that made him more terrifying. Claire ran. Her purse fell from her shoulder. Her shoes slipped off. She didn't stop to pick them up. She reached the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly, tears pouring down her cheeks. The doors opened. She threw herself inside and froze. A giant man stood in the elevator. He was dressed in black jeans, a dark shirt, and a heavy leather vest. His arms were covered in tattoos, and a silver chain hung from his belt. His gray beard framed a face that looked as though it had survived 100 wars. A scar ran near his eyebrow. His expression was cold enough to stop a room full of people from breathing. Claire instinctively backed against the wall. She had heard about him. Everyone in certain circles had. His name was Nathan Cross, former military contractor, billionaire businessman, owner of private security companies across the country, a man whose enemies disappeared from business overnight. Rumors followed him everywhere. Some said he had connections to people no one dared mention. Others claimed that when Nathan Cross decided someone was a threat, there was nowhere on earth that person could hide. To Claire, he looked terrifying. To Marcus, standing outside the elevator, he looked even worse. Nathan glanced toward Claire. He saw the tears. He saw the bruises on her wrist. He saw her trembling hands. Then he looked toward Marcus. The elevator doors began closing. Marcus lunged forward. Nathan stepped between him and Claire. The doors shut. For several seconds, Claire couldn't move. Nathan didn't touch her. He simply stood there, watching the numbers above the elevator doors change. Then he quietly asked whether she was hurt. Claire tried to answer, but her voice disappeared. She covered her mouth and began crying again. Nathan looked at her reflection in the polished elevator wall. He had seen people terrified before. He had seen soldiers afraid before battle. He had seen criminals panic when their plans collapsed. But Claire's fear was different. It wasn't fear of death. It was the fear of a person who had spent too long believing nobody would come when she screamed. The elevator stopped on the penthouse floor. Nathan stepped out, then paused when he realized Claire was still frozen inside. He didn't tell her to follow him. He simply left the doors open. After a moment, she stepped out. His penthouse was enormous, but strangely quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, while warm lights reflected across dark wood and marble. Yet there were no crowds, no parties, no photographs, no signs of a glamorous billionaire lifestyle. It felt almost lonely. Nathan gave Claire a blanket and called his security team. Within minutes, the entire hotel was secured. Claire eventually told him everything. She told him about Marcus. She told him about the photographs. She told him about leaving Chicago. She told him about sleeping with a chair against her hotel room door because she was terrified someone might enter. And finally, she admitted something that broke Nathan's heart. She said she had started believing that maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough to live alone. Nathan remained silent for a long time. Then he told her that surviving something terrible didn't make her weak. It meant she was still standing. Those words stayed with Claire. The next morning, Nathan discovered something troubling. Marcus wasn't just an angry ex-boyfriend. He had money, connections, and access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. Someone had been giving him Claire's private location details. Nathan began investigating. He found that Marcus had paid a former employee of Claire's company to track her movements. He had accessed old records and hired private investigators. He had been planning to force Claire back into his life. Nathan could have handled Marcus in 100 ruthless ways. But he didn't. Instead, he chose something Claire had almost forgotten existed: justice. He brought in lawyers, authorities, and professional investigators. He helped Claire document every message, photograph, threat, and incident. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting back. But Marcus wasn't finished. 3 nights later, Claire received another message. This time it simply said, "I know where you are." She dropped the phone. Nathan saw her face change. Before anyone could react, the penthouse security system detected movement near the private entrance. Nathan immediately moved Claire behind him. His security team arrived. But Marcus wasn't there. Instead, they found an envelope. Inside was an old photograph of Claire and Marcus from the first month they had met. On the back, someone had written, "You stole what belongs to me." Claire began shaking. Nathan took the photograph from her hands. For the first time, anger appeared in his eyes. Not the wild anger Claire had seen in Marcus. Something colder, controlled. Nathan promised Claire that no one would ever force her to belong to them again. But the biggest surprise came the following morning. Claire learned that Nathan hadn't always been the feared man people described. Years earlier, Nathan had been married to a woman named Hannah. She had spent years hiding the fact that her husband was struggling with severe depression after losing close friends during his military service. Nathan had been away too often, convinced that providing money and protection was enough. One morning, Hannah left him a letter. She told him that she didn't need a fortress. She needed a husband who would sit beside her when she cried. Nathan never saw her again. She died unexpectedly months later. Since then, Nathan had built walls around himself. He became feared because fear was easier than vulnerability. Claire realized something that day. The most dangerous man in the world wasn't dangerous because he enjoyed hurting people. He was dangerous because he had learned exactly how much pain the world could cause. And somehow, beneath all that darkness, there was still kindness. Weeks passed. Claire slowly began rebuilding her life. Nathan helped her find a new apartment under her own name. He connected her with a therapist and a support group. He never demanded gratitude. He never asked her to stay. He never treated her like something broken that needed fixing. Instead, he gave her choices. And that was something Marcus had never given her. One afternoon, Claire stood in front of a mirror and realized she was no longer checking the window every few seconds. She was smiling, really smiling. She returned to work and eventually started her own event planning company. She used her experience to organize charity events for women escaping abusive relationships. Nathan quietly supported the organization without putting his name on it. Months later, Claire received a letter from the court. Marcus had been convicted on multiple charges related to stalking, harassment, and unlawful surveillance. He was going to prison. Claire read the letter twice. Then she sat down and cried. But these weren't the same tears she had cried in the hotel corridor. These were tears of release. Nathan found her sitting alone in the office. She told him she couldn't believe it was finally over. He reminded her that the prison sentence wasn't what saved her. She had saved herself the moment she ran. Nathan had simply made sure she didn't have to run alone. Years later, Claire would remember that rainy night in New York and wonder what would have happened if the elevator doors had opened 1 second later. What if Nathan hadn't been there? What if she had stayed with Marcus? What if she had believed the lie that she was too weak to begin again? But life had placed her in that elevator for a reason. The man she feared most became the man who taught her not to fear herself. And Nathan Cross changed too. He began attending Claire's charity events. He laughed more. He stopped living like someone waiting for the next disaster. He finally understood what Hannah had tried to teach him years earlier. Protecting someone wasn't about building walls around them. It was about standing beside them while they learned to stand on their own. One spring evening, Claire stood on a stage in Chicago at a fundraiser for survivors of domestic abuse. The room was filled with hundreds of people. Nathan sat quietly in the back. Claire looked toward him. For a moment, she remembered the barefoot woman running through that hotel corridor, believing her life was over. Then she looked at the woman standing on the stage. Confident, strong, free. She told the audience that sometimes the person who saves your life doesn't look like a hero. Sometimes they look frightening. Sometimes they carry scars. Sometimes they have spent years hiding their own pain. But what matters isn't how someone looks. What matters is what they do when they see someone else hurting. Claire finished her speech and stepped off the stage. Nathan was waiting. He didn't say anything. He simply offered his hand. Claire took it. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone was holding her back. She felt like someone was walking beside her. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who may need a reminder that their darkest chapter does not have to become their ending. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment, "I choose courage," if you believe that no one should have to face their darkest moment alone. Because Claire's story was never really about the most dangerous man in the world. It was about a woman who thought she was running away from her life, only to discover that she was actually running toward a new one. She ran because she was afraid. She survived because she refused to give up. And somewhere inside an elevator, behind the terrifying face of a man everyone feared, she found something she had almost stopped believing existed. Safety, kindness, and a second chance. Sometimes, the person standing between you and your worst nightmare isn't the person you expect. Sometimes, the strongest protection comes from a wounded heart that understands your pain. And sometimes, the most beautiful beginning starts the exact moment you believe your story is finally over.